saying those talks failed. Those strikes will go ahead. Oh, hello there. So as you can see, it's all set up to go for that press conference. As soon as the RMT union get up behind those mics, we'll bring that to you. In the meantime, let's go to Ukraine, though, because Russia has appeared to have made small gains in the slow battle for the strategic city of Severodonetsk, southeast of the country's second biggest city, Kharkiv. But Russia continues to face sanctions from Europe. The Kremlin has called Lithuania's newest ban on the transit of goods to Russia's Kaliningrad region an openly hostile and unprecedented situation. Our correspondent John Sparks has the latest from Ukraine.
There is a flashpoint there, a mark or a point of tension, and that has really broken out into the open. What has happened is that the EU has moved to implement a ban on the transport of goods from Russia. And we're talking about things like metals and coal and computer technology, that sort of stuff. Basically, that kind of stuff is not allowed to move into European or EU territory. There is this bit of Russia, this slither of Russia on the Baltic Sea called Kaliningrad, sandwiched between Poland and Lithuania. There's agreement that allows people.
OK, let's go to Houston and listen to the RMT.
Come on in. Right, you ready? So, first of all, before we kick off, I just want to say to the public, we've had tremendous support coming in from all over the country, and indeed internationally, from ordinary working people, trade unionists and their organisations, and that was shown at the rally on Saturday when the RMT received a tremendous ovation from the rest of the organised labour movement in this country. But nevertheless, we're moving on now to the next phase of this campaign, and we've been in discussions with Network Rail and the train operators almost continuously for several weeks now, and indeed for nearly 18 months on the issues in this dispute. And despite what Grant Shapps said over the weekend when he was fabricating news items that we'd walked out of talks, we've never walked out of any talks at any stage in this dispute. And we remain in the room until the meeting is properly adjourned. And to be fair to the companies, we have kept up cordial relationships with the employers all the way through this. But what we have come to understand is that the dead hand of this Tory government is all over this dispute. And the fingerprints of Grant Shapps and the DNA of Rishi Sunak are all over the problems on the railway and indeed the problems in this society. And until they allow these employers to negotiate freely, I can't see that we're going to get a settlement to the issues that are in front of us. So we've now had offers from Network Rail and from the train operating companies, and the executive committee in this building has considered those offers, and they've rejected both of them. The Network Rail one was rejected on Friday, and the train operating company one, which was only put to us today, has been rejected this afternoon. Both sets of proposals are unacceptable, and it is now confirmed that the strike action that is planned for this week will go ahead on London Underground and on Network Rail and with the train operating companies. The source of this problem is the Tory government's decision to slash £4 billion of funding from our railway network. They've cut £2 billion from the National Railway, and they've cut £2 billion from TfL. And that is hobbling this industry, and it's forcing the companies to implement transport austerity and massive cuts to our system as we speak. They've now proposed, the rail companies, pay rates that are massively under the relevant rates of inflation. They do not address the cost of living crisis, and they have prevented a settlement to this dispute. At the behest of the government, the companies are also seeking to implement thousands of job cuts across the network and have failed to give any guarantee against compulsory redundancies. As a result of this transport austerity, the employing companies have taken the following decisions: to attack the railway pension scheme and the Transport for London scheme, diluting benefits, making staff work longer, up to 65 years of age, and making them poorer in retirement while paying increased contributions. They have decided to cut thousands of jobs across the rail network without that guarantee of no compulsory redundancies. They are cutting safety inspections by maintenance staff on the infrastructure by up to 50% in order to facilitate the mass redundancies. And in maintenance that alone, that will be 3,000 track workers who are out there repairing and maintaining the infrastructure and looking after the public. Their jobs are for the chop. They're attacking the terms and conditions and working practices in a form of internal fire and rehire, including lowering existing salaries and increasing the working week. These attacks mean that no trade union in this country could accept that agenda. And in fact, in many ways, it's similar to what P&O have put before us. Either you take diluted terms or you leave the industry. They even want to go so far as to restart the dispute on the role and responsibility of the Guard. And they're going to put massive cuts to the catering services on our railway. So we're going backwards, many years, in fact, to the cuts agenda that we've had under Thatcher and under British Rail when that was seriously underfunded over decades. They're going further and have told us today and last week that they intend to close every single ticket office in Britain, regardless of the accessibility needs of the public and the diversity of the passengers that use the railway system. They're cutting real pay for our members and their spending power through what are now lengthy pay freezes for nearly 3 years for many of our members. And the offers that we have are way below the retail price index, which is the relevant measure of inflation for us. Faced with such an aggressive agenda of cuts to jobs, conditions, pay and pensions, the RMT has no choice but to defend our members industrially and to stop this race to the bottom. The strikes on Network Rail, the train operators and London Underground will go ahead, and we again call on our members to stand firm, support the action, mount the pickets and demonstrate their willingness to fight for workplace justice. The RMT supports the campaign for a square deal for all working people in the face of the cost of living crisis, and our current campaign is a part of that more general campaign that means that public services have to be properly funded and all workers paid properly with good conditions. We remain available for discussions during the action and after the action and between the strike dates if the companies want to engage with us. But we are firmly of the belief that the only way for us to settle this dispute is for Grant Shapps and the government to allow these companies to negotiate and let the parties reach a reasonable agreement that will end the disruption of the service, will secure jobs and allow a decent transport system to be developed in this country. Thanks very much for listening.
When the whole country is suffering, what makes your representatives so special?
Well, we're not special. The whole country is suffering, and we have got a membership and a trade union that is prepared to fight for what we've got. What the rest of the country suffers from is the lack of power, the lack of the ability to organise, and the lack of the wherewithal to take on these employers that are continually driving down wages and making the working class in this country poorer year on year on year, while the rich get richer and dividends are accelerated and the stock market is reasonably healthy. We've got full employment. We've got full employment and falling wages, and that is a situation that has never happened before, and it cannot be tolerated by working people or by the trade union movement.
But the people that will suffer from the lack of transport, what is your message to them?
My message is that we regret that. We don't want that to happen, but this dispute has been manufactured by Shapps and by government policy. There was no need for them to cut the funding of the railway scheme, and there's no need for them to campaign actively for job cuts, pay cuts and safety cuts, and that's what they're doing.
Network Rail says the railway finances are already a mess. Do you not think that by taking strike action like this, you risk making them even worse?
Well, they're not a mess, so let's get this clear. The railway has been subsidised since time immemorial, at least since the First World War, and it probably always will be subsidised. What we're seeing now is a recovery in rail. Passenger numbers are up to 90% the week before last, and it's on course to go back to pre-COVID levels. But what we're seeing here is a smokescreen caused by COVID, And many employers are taking this opportunity. They're using what is a temporary phenomenon, COVID, and the temporary phenomenon of people being told not to go to work as a smokescreen to get rid of decent conditions, decent pay rates and decent agreements. Now, everybody wants our cities, towns and villages to recover. The way we do that, and one of the most important aspects of that, is by having a decent public transport system that can be relied on, is safe and accessible. Cutting staff, cutting services and cutting funding is the opposite to that, and nobody in our community should tolerate that from this government of billionaires who tell everyone else they've got to tighten their belts while they're raking it in.
Are you supported by the Labour leadership?
Am I supported by the Labour leadership? Well, the Labour leadership's got a problem, haven't they? They're against workers being exploited, and they're against this Tory government. They've got to find a way to connect to working class people in working class communities so they can get their votes back. So they've got to find their message. They've got to find some policies that get back to where working people are. We saw many working people out on the streets on Saturday. I think there's going to be more of that, and I think there's going to be a wave of industrial action, a wave of ballots and a wave of campaigning. So Keir Starmer and his team have got to work out a way how they connect with that and how they ride that wave of resistance and are in harmony with it, rather than standing to one side waiting for somebody to tell them what to do.
What were the pay proposals that you put to you from that without any
The pay proposals are a 2% down payment with the possibility of 1% more, but we have to accept their full agenda of job cuts, changes to working practices, and of course we have to accept that we haven't had a pay rise from our members for 3 years, and this is more of a whimper than a bang. There's nothing in this that we could compromise on, and I don't think any trade union in this country could accept what's on the table today.
If you don't get the agreement you're looking for, how long are you willing to carry this transport?
Well, our campaign will run for as long as it needs to run until we get a settlement that's acceptable to our people. Whenever we get an offer that is tenable, we will put that to our members in a referendum. But what's on the table now, given the mandate that we've got, where 89% of our people voted in favour of going on strike, this does not address any of the multitude of issues that are in this campaign that we've got. I don't know how long that will take. I think it will take as long as the government needs to take to unshackle the companies to negotiate with us properly.
If you don't get that, could we be seeing a series of strikes in the last council?
I think you will, yes. There you go.
If everyone got a 12% pay rise, would it make inflation worse?
Well, nobody's had a 12% pay rise. Most people have not had a pay rise at all in this country for 3 years. And many of the public sector workers, as well as private sector workers, have not had a proper pay rise since Osborne and the other geezer, Cameron, whatever his name was, came to power. So the idea that there is a wage price spiral, that the accelerating wages of workers is causing prices to go up, is a nonsense. What's causing prices to go up is profiteering. Profits in this country are not down. What is down is wages. The only people that are paying the price of COVID are the working class of this country. So there hasn't been a wage price spiral, and there's no need to think that there will be one by people catching up with wages. Prices aren't catching up with wages. Wages are trying to catch up with prices. And nobody's had 12%, and nobody's asked for 12%, by the way.
Is the union resisting change to working practices that would make the railway more efficient?
No, we're not. We deal with working practice changes all of the time in every company that we deal with, whether it's a bus company, a maritime company, an oil company or a railway company. We negotiate change on a permanent basis with every one of our employers, including Network Rail, Transport for London and the train operators. What we've got here is an unreasonable agenda of mass pay cuts, mass job cuts and slashing of our terms and conditions that have been negotiated over a long period. Those are all good conditions. The problem with our conditions is that everybody else's are worse. And the problem with some of our pay rates is everybody else's are worse. So what we need to do is level up. And I think somebody else came up with that quote. And what we're being forced to do is suppress working people to deliver government policy and profits for their friends in the city. And that's not acceptable.
There's a lot of taxpayers who might feel it's a bit unfair, so they'd be funding pay increases of 7, 8, maybe even higher %. when they're struggling with the cost of living themselves? What do you say to them?
Well, those taxpayers are also suffering with the cost of living, and many of them are working in the public sector, and they're facing pay cuts. Everybody who works in health, education, care, council services have all seen pay suppression. And the only way to break that cycle is to get pay deals that break it. Now, all money in circulation comes from all of us. So somebody is paying for every service or product that you buy. But if we have continual price suppression, you will have continual hyper profit. And there's got to be a balance in the society between profit and income. We're not getting enough income and they're getting too much profit.
Who's the profit that you're talking about here?
Well, last year in the railway industry, the rolling stock companies, Network Rail subcontractors and the train operating companies made £500 million of direct profit. That's a fact. It's in their books. Last year on rail, the first group, which is one of the major shareholders and train operating companies, made £108 million out of rail alone. They have been subject to a takeover bid of £1.2 billion. Go Ahead, who's one of the other companies, are also subject to a takeover bid. So somebody thinks they're going to make profits out of rail because private equity companies from abroad are coming here to buy these companies while their managing directors are earning millions. The top earner in Network Rail earned £1.2 million in salary during COVID. His chief financial operator executive earned nearly £500,000 each year during COVID. All of these executives that we're dealing with are on salaries in excess of £350,000 a year. Somebody's making money out of the railway, it's just not our members.
So there should be some kind of windfall tax like we've seen in the old...
Well, I'd like the windfall tax to be a windfall for our members through their wages. That would be a start.
But someone's got to pay for that additional money.
Well, we're all paying for it. We'll pay for it through the fares and we'll pay for it through a regeneration of rail if we can get a system that works on behalf of the people and behalf of the economy and behalf of the environment rather than for private profit.
So would you be happy if rail fares went up to pay for higher wages?
Not particularly, because rail fares have gone up in order to pay for profits. Profits since privatisation has been something around 12 billion. So all of that profit has been extracted from our railway system. If we'd used that to invest, we could have lowered the fares, we could have improved the services, and we could have had a square deal for railway workers. It's the extraction of profit from the railway system, which is largely subsidised through the taxpayer, that has caused the cause of one of our problems.
So surely the answer is a tax, an additional tax on it?
Well, it's not the only answer. We want an answer to our problems at this time. And the problem for our members is losing their jobs, having their conditions ripped up, and not getting a pay deal. So when we've addressed that one, we can move on to government policy.
Do you think this could drag on as long as a Southern dispute? I mean, how long do you think this might go on for?
I don't know. I can't answer that question. We don't set out, with a project saying it's going to last this long, and if we haven't got a deal, it will be wrapped up. It will go on until somebody offers us a deal that we can accept and we can put to our members, and they vote for it in a referendum. Anyone else? Are we finished? Good? Okay. Thank you very much.
So quite a frank McLynch there from the RMT union, setting out their position, why they believe those talks failed. They said they had two sets of proposals and both were unacceptable to them. So the strike goes ahead. Mr Lynch said that they are available for discussion. So let's bring in our political correspondent, Rob Powell. He's in Westminster. Rob, that was interesting. He was very damning, wasn't he? Not only about Grant Shapps, but also Rishi Sunak.
Yeah, pretty fiery stuff from Mick Lynch there. He's, of course, the General Secretary of the RMT union, so the most senior person in that union that's been involved in those discussions is essentially overseeing the strikes that will bring much of the country's train services to a halt over the coming 5 or 6 days. He said that those discussions had broken down, that pay offers had been put on the table around 2 to 3%, and they had both been rejected and found to be unacceptable. He was placing the blame squarely at the door of Grant Shapps and Rishi Sunak. He said of Grant Shapps that this has the fingerprints of Grant Shapps and the DNA of Rishi Sunak all over it, and said it was the dead hand of this Tory government all over the dispute as well. So clearly he believes the government is not giving Network Rail and not giving the rail companies, which of course the government gives a large amount of money to, the bandwidth to increase that pay offer, and is also unhappy with what the government calls modernisations, what they call cuts, that they want to put through in the coming months as well. I thought another part of that would be alarming for the government, but really alarming for anyone really that uses the trains repeatedly and regularly over the coming months, is Mick Lynch also said that he predicted a wave of industrial action, a wave of walkouts and protests over the coming months, not just in rail, but in other sectors as well, really re-emphasising what he told Sky News yesterday, that he believes really the disparity between how much pay is going up, especially in the public sector, and how much prices are going up, really could bring more of these types of strikes in other sectors in the months ahead. And I think if that does come about, this could all get quite ugly politically for the government quite quickly.
Yeah, it's not looking like a great summer, is it, Rob? Thanks a lot. Now, aid agencies are warning of a humanitarian catastrophe in East Africa due to drought and the impact of the war in Ukraine. The blockade of Ukraine's ports has caused a global food shortage and a sharp increase in prices. And in countries unable to grow their own food, the result could be devastating for millions of people. Now, the Horn of Africa is facing severe drought after the rainy season failed for the 4th year in a row, with Somalia and the self-declared Republic of Somaliland facing the worst drought in 40 years. Almost 800,000 people have left their homes in the countryside to seek help in cities.